We do have a physical home for Community Engagement and Research Unit, which is Treaty 4 land, the original territory of the Cree, Sioux, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota peoples, and the traditional homeland of the Métis. So certainly want to acknowledge those lands. For those of you joining us today from Saskatchewan, you may know Lynn Gidlick through her work that she's done in the past number of years with the Community Research Unit. Many of you have attended some of the professional development sessions, the Toolkit workshop series that have been organized by the CRU. This is a really exciting time for the Community Resource Unit, as they now have a brand new name. They are now called the Community Engagement and Research Unit, and this change was in response to more accurately reflect the full range of the work that they do. Lynn and her colleague, Irina Kovrenkov, again, many of you may be familiar with her. She is a professor at the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy. And Irina and Lynn are co-leads for the Western Hub of the Canadian Philanthropy Partnership Network. There is more information available on the network on their website, fundersinthewest.ca. So again, if that's something of interest to you, you may want to check that out. As I say, Lynn and Irina are heavily involved in this organization, and they're actually using some of the funds from their grant to put on educational sessions such as this one today. So thank you so much, Lynn and Irina, for using these funds to truly benefit the community and a very significant need that has been identified relative to how to host a virtual AGM. As mentioned, the Community Engagement and Research Unit did actually do a community needs assessment, and again, really high on the topic list was how to host a virtual annual general meeting. I would ask you all to please stay tuned for more information from them about future sessions as they continue to examine what they heard when they did that community needs assessment. Before I introduce today's speakers, I also wanted to give a quick plug out to a new national organization that Lynn is on the steering committee for. This organization is called Community Campus Engage Canada, and they helped promote this webinar today. So we certainly thank them for that, because many of you will have learned about this session and this event through them. Again, we also encourage all of you who maybe don't know as much about the Community Campus Engage Canada to check them out. Their mandate is to help community partners with post-secondary institutions to do work in addressing pressing social issues, environmental challenges. And again, their website is full of useful information for nonprofits and how to build reciprocal relationships. Before we get started, folks, just wanted to note that this session is being recorded. So we do have a maximum number of 100 participants today. We are expecting a full complement. We actually had some folks on the waiting list. So this session will be recorded and will be made available through the Community Engagement and Resource Unit website after this session is complete. What I'd like to do next is just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to go through and introduce our guest presenters today. So we have 3 speakers we're going to hear from. What I would ask folks by way of housekeeping, if you don't mind keeping your devices on mute. And the other piece is, because we are expecting an extremely high number of participants, it is also a very good idea to put your video, to turn your video off, just so we don't have any bandwidth issues. So again, there'll be lots of provision for turning your mics back on, turning your video back on later in the session, so we can certainly field questions if individuals wanted to ask them verbally. As far as questions themselves, we are going to ask that everyone leave your questions or that we will answer the questions at the end of all of the guest presenters having completed their respective presentations. So again, what I would ask is that as you are coming up with questions, if you would just please put them in the chat. Very fortunate today to have Brendan Anderson on the call with us. He is working with the Community Engagement and Research Unit. I've collaborated with him in how we'll manage, and he's going to sort of support me in moderating today. He'll be watching for those questions in the chat, and then he'll be sending them to me. So at the end of all of the presentations, I will go through those questions that you've submitted and that Brendan has provided to me, and we'll have our guest presenters respond to them. Again, there will be provision at the end of the session. Absolutely feel free to turn your video back on, your mic on, and we can field any questions verbally as well at the end of the session. So with that, folks, I do want to move into a short introduction of each of our panelists today, and thank you so much to the three of you for being here. I know we're just really going to have a fulsome session and get to all of those questions that folks are wondering about in this new reality of how are we going to host, successfully host annual general meetings. So the three panelists that we have today for our participants, the first is Christy Fessler. Christy is a board member with REACH and a past board chair of the YWCA Regina. She served on the YWCA Regina Board of Directors for 11 years and has been with REACH for about a year now. She has participated in and helped facilitate virtual AGMs for both of those organizations. During the day, she's the supervisor of print and production services at Farm Credit Canada. And just to give you a bit of an overview, Christy will be examining topics that include the following: methods to announce an AGM and joining instructions to membership and the broader public. So again, this is in tandem with respectful organizations, bylaws, and other governance policies. She'll also be examining considerations for security of the virtual meeting in light of some of the Zoom security issues that we did experience in March and April of this year. She will be looking at methods to disseminate information in advance of your annual general meeting, so things such as annual reports and those financial and other documents. As well, she'll examine considerations for full participation, joining by phone, video, passing motions, providing everyone with an overview of meeting functions so they know how the proceedings will take place, how the motions will be passed. Our second guest presenter is Paige Ross. Paige Ross is Manager Brand Engagement with United Way of Calgary and area. With a background in sponsorship and events management, Paige plays an active role in planning and executing public-facing events for the United Way Calgary. And of course, 2020 saw a shift in the role as all events moved into a virtual or a digital format, including their AGM, which hosted over 170 guests and included a musical performance to enhance the participants' experience. So I'll be very curious to hear more about that. Paige is going to discuss tips and tricks for hosting online events, building an engaging experience and engaging attendee experience for your annual general meeting, some of the tech tools that they've reviewed for fiduciary voting and why they chose the platforms that they did, as well as some other alternate choices that they've examined that seem to have worked well for other nonprofits. So that will be very informative to learn from. In addition, Paige is going to cover some of the lessons learned that they've garnered along the way and share those with you. And then finally, folks, our last presenter will be Gloria Desantis. Dr. Desantis is the head of Justice Studies Department at the University of Regina. Her teaching and research areas of expertise are nonprofits, charities, advocacy, social justice, and community engagement. Before moving into academia, Gloria worked for almost 20 years in a number of nonprofits in senior executive roles such as executive director, senior manager, research director, and community planner. She is also the president of the Association for Nonprofit and Social Economy Research, which is a national organization that just went through their very first virtual annual general meeting. So again, for Gloria, there are a few areas that she'll cover or topics that she'll examine, including various skills and mindsets for virtual AGM delivery, accessibility, so really understanding that you can't serve your membership if you don't know who they are. So what does it mean from an accessibility standpoint? Becoming comfortable with technology for both you and your members, And as well, Gloria is going to give us some mindful advice, a bit of a heads up, if you will, to be careful with what you marry with your AGM, because it isn't business as usual. So it'll be very interesting to hear thoughts and comments in that regard. So that gives you an overview to our participants on your guest speakers, a bit of their bio and the areas that they'll be covering today. With that, I'm going to start with turning the floor over to Christy Fessler. Again, Christy, thank you so much for joining us today, and really looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shari. And I remembered to take my mic off mute before I started to talk. So, you know, getting used to this meeting format. I thought I'd start off by just letting folks know that, you know, there are virtual AGMs, and there's also another idea that my 9-year-old came up with last night as we were discussing this session at supper. You know, I was explaining, you know, why we were having this, and you know, virtual AGMs, and I would say that she is a meeting pro. She has been to board meetings and committee meetings with me since she was about 3 months old. She's been to all sorts of them. And so she said, well, like, I don't understand why you guys have to do this on Zoom or online. Why can't you just all get to a big park, sit in a circle, make sure everybody is, you know, physically distanced appropriately, put a little stage in the middle, get a microphone, and then the speaker can just stand in the middle of the circle. Everybody gets to be outside. You don't have to be on a video. And so I thought, you know, that was a pretty creative way to look outside the box for this. But in all seriousness, you know, I'm here to share my experience with 2 virtual AGMs for organizations here in Regina, the REACH and the YWCA, both of which typically happen in the spring. So we were scrambling a bit when we realized that we couldn't do them in person. And we also knew, you know, some of the considerations we had for the organizations were Saskatchewan nonprofit legislation was not, didn't allow for virtual AGMs as we understood it early on. And so, you know, there was a bit of apprehension around, you know, how are we going to do this? And so luckily, the very official method of news dissemination, Twitter, I saw a tweet from the provincial government and talked to Dana, our executive director at REACH, to say that the provincial government here in Saskatchewan had made provisions for virtual AGMs. So, you know, we made sure our bylaws allowed for that. The province, their legislation was updated to say, yes, this could happen. And so we were like, all right, let's make this happen. We used Zoom as our meeting format, simply because it, at that point in time, in May, that seemed to be the most accessible format for a wide variety of people. The board composition of REACH, you know, that's one thing that I guess we're fortunate for, is that membership for REACH is typically board members, and there are a few other interested parties, but we aren't an organization that might have large number of public members that we would have to be mindful of it to have them participate in the meeting too. So our membership numbers were very small in comparison to those. But, you know, we still have to follow the same rules around announcements. How did we advertise the AGM? So, you know, through our website, through social media channels. We also put up posters within the building that we're in, because we did have some members of the public, we were still providing service to members of the public at that point in time. So we used those methods to disseminate the announcement of the AGM. We also had to consider, how do we get people to register so that, you know, Shari had mentioned we were considering the security issues of Zoom, because at that time it was still a bit unsure and there were some issues happening. So we wanted to make sure that the meeting itself was done in a secure way. So for us, it was requesting that people register in advance, and we would share the Zoom login information with them in advance. And then we also had their names. So, you know, Zoom has the waiting room function. And so we used that. We knew who to expect. And so we could admit people as they logged on, so that we didn't run into any issues that other organizations had experienced in February and March, and perhaps even before that. And within the Zoom instructions, you know, we had a variety of people on the board of directors, some who are in the paid labor force, some who have recently retired from the paid labor force, and other folks who have been long retired from the paid labor force. And so we wanted to be sure to consider how they would be able to participate in the meeting, whether it was through Zoom technology, by video, or through phone. And within our communication with everybody, we also said, you know, let's reach out to us. And if you have troubles or things like that, we'll try and find alternate ways of you participating in the meeting. You know, one of our board members did reach out to me. She is one of the individuals who has been long retired and really was very nervous about the Zoom meeting, the Zoom technology. And so for us, I was able to provide her with some written instructions and some pictures so that she could easily follow along. And she and I had a test call so that she could feel comfortable as a practice run so she could participate. You know, and again, for smaller organizations like REACH, it was a great way to ensure that folks could participate and practice that way. So, you know, if that's something that you're able to do, to have a point person as the technology expert or perceived technology expert, you know, that would be something that I would recommend too. Another thing that we talked about was how the material would be delivered to the participants. So in our situation, you know, our AGMs are not, you know, we don't have musical performances at our AGMs. They're really about, you know, that annual process of you know, approving financial documents and annual reports and things like that. So again, we were able to physically deliver paper copies to each of the participants because it was a small number of people. And we were also able to deliver the items electronically through email. And, you know, I found that it was a really nice touch point for me as a board member to just have folks from the organization drop the meeting package off. It was still during, you know, time where we had to be very, very cautious. So it was just sort of away from the doorstep. But again, it was at that time where folks were really looking for connections. So it was a nice touch. that way. Yeah, and so then folks had it in their hands. So rather than folks having to sort of manipulate different screens and things like that, they were able to look at the paper copies. Again, I say that with the caveat that it was a small number of people. One other piece that we were very aware of to make sure was fulfilled before the meeting and within our bylaws and things like that was to make sure that membership requirements were fulfilled. So depending on your organization, there may have to be a fee paid, for example, by a certain period of time, or, you know, whatever it looks like within your organization. For us, we have a small $5 annual fee that we have to pay as a member for REACH. And so we made sure that everybody's $5 had been paid, and we could continue on with the voting and things like that at the meeting. So then in terms of the meeting structure, once we got in, you know, as Shari did this morning, very similar. We told folks, you know, keep your microphone on mute. You know, we laid out the process of how the meeting would run. And for us, we decided to do the voting process by, you know, for the motions that came up, we asked for folks to say that if they didn't agree with the motion, rather than having everybody try and raise their hand, you know, if we were on, because we had a mix of people on video and on the phone. So we had people verbally acknowledge their dissent, I suppose, to the motion as a way to keep things moving forward and to avoid that everybody talking at once and the computer and the sound just goes a bit wacky and it's hard to follow. We also reminded folks to, you know, be mindful turning your mic off and on. Again, you know, just sort of those housekeeping things for video meetings or teleconferences and things like that. Yeah, and so, you know, from our experience, it was successful. You know, it wasn't obviously the same as being together as we typically would, but we were able to fulfill our obligations. And, you know, I had paid for a Zoom, the lowest Zoom subscription that you can. Just when all of these things started to happen, I figured, you know what, I'm going to need a bit more capability, you know, for family things, as well as these sort of volunteer things I do as well. And so that $20, it's a $20 a month subscription, that just gave us a few more things, you know, a bit more functionality with the Zoom. And so, you know, if that's a possibility, if Zoom is the technology you're choosing to use, I would recommend that personally, just to give you a bit more of that functionality. So yeah, that was our experience with REACH, and with the YWCA, it was very similar as well. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Christy. You've certainly given us lots to think about. I really appreciated the approach to voting. So this has been something that I certainly grappled with the numerous AGMs that I've hosted. Are we going to ask everyone to raise their hands in favor, and then, you know, no, or are we going to use the, you know, the hands feature? I love it. I think that's such an innovative idea to say, okay, you know, only if you are voting no, or only if you're abstaining. So making it a little bit more of an effective and efficient process. I think that's just brilliant. I haven't seen anyone do that yet. So I thought that was quite on point. and the sensitivities to providing, you know, alternative ways for individuals to participate. And really, you know, we're carrying out this statutory requirement, but Reach's ability to be able to really respond on an individual or personal level or accessibility level as may be required for the participants, including dissemination of those materials, you know, both physically and by email. And equally so being mindful of those security pieces that we absolutely were experiencing with Zoom, particularly in March and April. So again, really ensuring that, you know, you must register. We will send you the link, and having a bit of that control on the environment for a whole lot of the AGM environment for a whole lot of reasons. So great stuff, Christy. There were a couple of questions that came in relative to your presentation. I'll bring those to you and back to the panelists at the end of the session. So again, thanks so much, Christy. And with that, we'll move now over to Paige Ross. Hello, Paige. Greetings from Saskatchewan to Alberta. Thank you so much for joining us from Calgary. Really looking forward to your presentation, and thanks so much for being with us today. Go right ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shari, and thank you to Lynn for having me as part of this discussion. So I'm Paige. I oversee all of our events for United Way of Calgary and area. Like so many others, this pandemic has certainly altered our world, from fundraising to pivoting to online events and engagement with our donors, all within weeks of that initial quarantine. So I'll talk a little bit about our AGM. Hopefully you pick up something fun. We did some crazy fun things with ours because by June we knew that everybody was a little bit Zoom fatigued. So the more fun we could have, the better. And let's be honest, AGMs aren't known for being exciting. So if we could add a little bit of pizzazz to it, that was a win for us. So we had originally scheduled our AGM to be in person for late April. By the end of March, we found ourselves without a venue and without even a hint of when in-person events might be allowed again. So at that point, we shifted our plans to be really digitally focused for the remainder of the year. So including everything from April right through to December. We're looking at everything from our kickoff to our plane pull events, to even our corporate campaigns this fall being reimagined in that digital lens. We are also really lucky to have a very supportive board and a lot of time to plan a digital event. So our bylaws stated that our AGM had to be held no later than June 30th. With all the work that we were doing with our community response fund, our team's focus was shifting quite a bit at that time to focus more on supporting locally with our community. So we really pushed our boundaries and pushed our AGM right to June 25th to allow some extra time to plan and perfect our AGM and really plan and perfect digital events in general. You know, 3 months ago, digital events weren't something that we did. You know, I had been on Zoom for meetings with clients out of town, but that was about it. So you know, it's something that was brand new for all of us. We learned on the fly. We failed on the fly, as you do with any other events. So our planning team for the AGM, it included myself, our marketing assistant, our president's executive assistant, and we had some support from our IT manager. Our IT team really, right when this pandemic was hitting, they really took the reins in, you know, picking up Microsoft Teams and picking Zoom. So I don't know why they decided on those features, so I won't talk too much about that, but those are the platforms that we've chosen and have been using. But we broke our AGM into sort of two components to plan. So our fiduciary angle, which I'll talk about a little bit in the next little bit here. That part included what voting tools we used, ensuring we have quorum, and then having the right people in place to pass our motions as needed. The second part being our event experience. So public facing, user experience, everything from registration to content planning for the remainder of the event. So here I'll break out into sort of those two little areas, what we did, and hopefully you learned something fun. So our main planning goals for our AGM were: 1, provide easy access to the online event and voting, provide clear and easy to understand communication to our attendees and our speakers, and of course, keep the program short and engaging. For registration, we used Eventbrite for our guests to register. We had 2 different registration links, one for voters, one for non-voters, as our event was open to the general public as well. There is also a registration feature that Zoom has. We have used it for other events, but we really needed that separation from our voters and non-voters just to keep our voting communications really clear of who we were sending that information to. The day before our event, so we sent 2 very similar email communications to our attendees. The first one to our registered donors, it included our Zoom webinar link, information on how to access it, including the Zoom how to, in case somebody by that point hadn't attended a Zoom webinar or anything, as well as the voting information. We also included in there a reminder of where to find our financials on our website and our annual impact report, which we moved online this year as well. The other one to our general audience included essentially the exact same things, except it did not include the voting information. So day before, we also held speaker briefings, which I highly recommend for everything. By June, it's nice to assume that most people have been part of a Zoom call or a webinar, but the reality is we are all still learning on the fly. So highly recommend as many briefings as you need to keep your presenters absolutely comfortable. It'll help you on the day of tenfold. So day of our event, we had quite a bit of support behind the scenes just to help ensure that our staff and our members that were attending were feeling really comfortable. So I'll walk through sort of the roles that we had. So we had event production. So that was myself. I oversaw all of our components of the event, answering any questions from our speakers and in general in the Q&A, helped kept everybody on track. So this included, sending quick chat notes to whoever was next to present, being like, get ready, you're up next, turn your video on now. And then supporting them with muting and unmuting themselves, because we know that that still happens sometimes, myself included, we all do it. We also had 1 staff member dedicated to just sharing the slides alongside the speaking remarks. So we had slides that went along with all of our fiduciary components and then some basic ones for our non-fiduciary component of our event. We had 1 staff member dedicated to our voting tool, and I'll talk about the tool a little bit later on. His role was just to activate each question and confirm when the motion passed by number of votes. We also had a staff member dedicated to answering any technical questions. I leaned on our IT guys for this one. So they were there to help anybody with, if they couldn't get their sound to work in Zoom, or why can't the voting tool work on my browser? All those little technical things that you get all the time in Zoom. So we had somebody dedicated just to help those folks out. We also had one of our staff members, dedicated to answering any organizational questions. They're going to come up. Somebody's always going to ask about, what does fundraising this year look for you? Or any, she was just there to answer any positive, any negative questions, or any contentious issues that might have come up. Luckily, no contentious issues came up for us, so she was very underutilized, but I felt better knowing that she was there. And then of course our president's assistant was there to take notes and support our president and our board throughout all of their pieces. So to meet the goal of keeping our event short and engaging, we did a few changes. We limited the time for our event. So typically in the past, our AGMs were about 2 hours long, with about 40 minutes for the fiduciary components, and then an hour with organizational updates, impact stories, and award ceremonies. For the digital version of our event, we cut much of the non-fiduciary component and really only included a brief report back from our president on the prior year, which included your volunteer hours, our key numbers, and some impact stories from 2019. A look ahead from our president for the year ahead. This also included some remarks around our work with our Community Response Fund in Calgary. We also had an update from our Indigenous Advisory Committee on the work that they are embarking on. Again, short and sweet, just so we had those updates. And then we always do our Francis Lafave Award presentation. So we did have our recipients receive an award live and have some brief remarks on why they're part of United Way in Calgary. To engage our voting members, so flipping from the program, we set up a few test questions. So once they received that email, the day before the event with all their information, we had the voting tool ready to go, but we thought we'd have some fun with it. So we put some fun trivia questions about United Way. In Calgary, we're celebrating 80 years this year. So it's sort of true or false, is United Way of Calgary and area celebrating 80 years this year? Lots of people hit true. Some didn't know and hit false. So just a fun interactive way to engage with people even before our event. And on the flip side, have them learn a little bit more about us as well. We also included a text question for our voters live during our event, right before that fiduciary component, just to work at any other final glitches for anybody who might not have figured out or logged in yet to the voting tool. We also added in a community impact video. So we produced this video earlier in the year, and it was actually slated to be played at our annual recognition gala. However, thank you, COVID, that ended up canceling our gala. So this was a great different place to use that video that was produced. And then, yes, we also added a live local musician, which at the time sounded crazy. In the end, it was awesome. A local woman here who's a musician, she created a very COVID specific song called One Day Soon. And she had been donating all the funds from streaming and downloads of her song to the Community Response Fund because she truly felt like she still had her full-time job. This was sort of bonus income. She couldn't keep that money for herself, so she was happy to donate it. And we were thrilled to have her join us. She closed out the end of the program with the song. It was beautiful. It was really fun, and certainly something new for all of us to do. And then on the voting end of things, to keep our efficiencies of moving our event along quickly, we pre-selected who would be passing and seconding our motions to keep the program moving forward. This way, we weren't looking for those hands up or somebody, chiming in over unmute with I second the motion, or like trying to dig through the chat to find those. So we had predetermined who would be doing that. On the Zoom webinar side, it meant they were brought onto the panelists function side so that they could mute and unmute themselves when they were called up for it. So some wins from that portion of the event. The scripting was short and succinct. We felt that our attendees enjoyed a way shorter presentation. Our attendance was higher than previous in-person AGMs. We really felt that the convenience of tuning in from your home or office for the full event or a portion of the event was really attractive to many. From our end, the ability to download the transcript and the video following the event really helped ensure the accuracy of our AGM notes. We didn't opt to share a copy of the AGM publicly afterwards because at the end of the day, it is an annual general meeting and it just was our decision for it. We also like the ability to download the actual attendee list. So we weren't, manually tracking who arrived at an in-person event, and, it was easy to show who registered versus who actually showed up. Our other wins, we did multiple test run-throughs with that internal team that I talked through, just to make sure that everybody really understood their role, when to advance slides, when to activate voting, and so on. We were doing those right up until the night before. Our AGM was at 8 a.m., so it meant that we were all logging on for sort of 6:30 a.m. for any final things. Some learnings from that portion. No matter how much you brief your speakers, there will always be digital questions, so just be ready for them. If you don't know the answer, not the end of the world either. Make sure your speakers understand the behind the scenes roles. On that panelist portion of Zoom, one thing we found was, we had our IT team answering those Q&A questions, but our panelists couldn't actually see us answering them. So because we were responding privately so that any donor information or any, voting information wasn't getting shared to the broader group. So that was one of our learnings, was just make sure they understand the technical things and remind them often as well. Our other learning was definitely do a speaker briefing with those who are assigned to second motions. We had pre-picked them, as I mentioned, and only had really sent them an email like, here's sort of what to expect, but we didn't do an in-person email, which meant we definitely had a few technical glitches where people were unmuting at the wrong time, or putting their video on when they shouldn't be. So I was in the back end, like madly muting and unmuting people at the wrong time. So, or putting them back to how they were supposed to be, rather. And then expect the unexpected. Just like live events, anything can and possibly will go wrong. We had a really funny moment with our MC. She came back to introduce the next section, had the strangest look on her face, and introduced a part that wasn't actually taking place for about another 15 minutes. Our speakers at the time were really awesome, jumped in to keep it on track. What we didn't know until the end of the event is she was hosting as an MC from her office. Unbeknownst to us, the window washers were washing our windows, and their cart banged really hard on her window, scared her enough to drop her script. It was funny. It was horrible at the moment, really funny at the end, which is how every good joke goes, which then might lead to my other recommendation. Consider using a digital prompter if you're going to use it. There's a couple out there that'll keep your script rolling on the screen. We didn't use one, but it would have definitely lessened the chance of our papers going flying. And then live music, it's awesome. Don't be afraid of it. Definitely do a couple sound checks to ensure the sound is crystal clear. We did 2 sound checks with our musician ahead of time, and then one the morning of as well. Alternatively, pre-record the music and then just share the video. It'll look and sound just like it's live. And then just before I finish up, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the digital voting tools that we explored. So for our quorum, we need 10 people. But knowing that our audience was really quite diverse in their digital capabilities, we knew we needed a tool that was going to be very user-friendly, easy to explain on the fly. So some tools that we considered. So Zoom Webinar does have a poll feature. This would have been a really easy option if all of our attendees were donors. However, as our event was open to the general public, we would have had to scrub a lot of the data on each vote, and that would have been a nightmare and not very user-friendly for us. We also looked at a tool called Election Buddy. This one's a pretty popular tool for AGM voting. However, I personally couldn't figure out how to get the live results on a per motion basis, which is how we like to pass our motions. So it looked really good. It looks like a really great tool for election ballot style voting, where you do all your voting and submit it at the end. But yeah, once I couldn't get past that part, I moved on because there's not a lot of time to waste. Swift polling. So this is the tool we ended up choosing for our voting. It was really simple to set up and provided the live results we were looking for each motion. They also provided a nonprofit discount, which made our voting tool really cost efficient. Some pros of Swift polling, it was very user-friendly to vote. Voters didn't need to make an account. They just had to simply enter an event code right into the Swift polling webpage to get access. And then the tech that was doing the voting, he would just activate the question or the motion, sorry, as it came up in the script. You got instant live results. You could see the bar moving as people were voting yes or no. It also has the option for a text in to vote. We didn't use this option, but it is there for those who are keen to try that kind of space. Some cons of it. Some of our users couldn't get it to work on their specific web browsers. Our IT team actively tried to support them, and there didn't seem to be a common issue. In the end, it was really only 4 of our 160 voters that couldn't vote, so it wasn't a huge issue in the end. And then the other con is you can't see exactly who voted for what, so if that's important to your voting, then this might not be the right tool for you. And then in reviewing other digital AGMs ahead of ours, I attended probably 6 just to get a sense of what everyone was doing. I did notice a few nonprofits just use the chat function for their voting. So having any of their donors just write in like, yes, I approve this motion. And I assume from the back end, they had a staff member doing a live tally of how many guests voted. And then overall, in the end, we were really happy with our AGM, really happy with where it went, had some learnings, but when don't you at any type of event. And while I can't say for sure what 2021 will hold, I'm pretty sure we'll consider hosting our AGM and other events online again in the future.
That was incredible, Paige. What an awful lot of information. Oh my goodness, fantastic. Again, I really do appreciate sort of the thoughtfulness that was put in realizing that by the time you were looking at having your AGM, that you actually had a membership body that was already starting to experience Zoom fatigue. So that early thinking around brevity, around, you know, again, what are our statutory obligations, maybe scaling back some of that, you know, the event or the experience side. Certainly in my experience, we did the very same thing for one of my clients, where normally for this, as you said, you know, AGMs can be boring. It's hard to get people to attend. We were in a position where we couldn't have our normal testimonials or consumer impact stories being shared. Same reason, we wanted to keep it brief. So we actually took a different approach with our annual report. And I think for you folks, it's the impact report. We added far more testimonials, and we took out a lot of the pictures and that kind of thing. And we added more of the actual testimonials and the experience to really share the impact of the work that was happening with that particular nonprofit. So again, some of those pieces that you spoke to really do make sense. The piece around brevity, key, I believe as well. Your advice on putting together an actual AGM planning team and all of those component parts, whether it's, you know, the assignment of the tech person, predetermining first and seconders, that's brilliant. Wow, that would have saved for the AGMs I've done, you know, waiting for that sort of response. The idea of the training sessions, the briefing sessions, and as you said, right up to and including the day of, to really ensure that you had a smooth and flowing event that really did engage everyone. And it's some pretty incredible lessons learned there. The funny stuff, as well as, you know, those that advice on having that musical or other sort of entertainment component, even if it is pre-recorded, for example. Again, another really fantastic idea. Finally, I did appreciate your comments around attendance. My experience has absolutely been higher attendance at the AGMs that I've hosted virtually. And as I say, there have been numerous in the last several months. I think it is that accessibility. Yes, folks have a bit of the Zoom fatigue, but the idea that they could pop in, maybe it's only for half an hour, maybe it's 45 minutes, or if it's, you know, an hour event, they'll take that time. And we actually have had higher AGM attendance than our in-person events, believe it or not. So really interesting to hear that that was your experience as well. Fantastic. Again, Paige, a couple of questions that have come through, and I'll just keep those to the end, and then we can come back and answer any of those questions specifically. As well, I know there's more sort of query in around different types of voting tools. I've used a few different voting tools and aware of the ones that you've talked about. So maybe we can examine that a little bit more at the end of the session if folks would like to. Wonderful. Thanks again very much, Paige. So with that, we're going to move now to our final guest speaker. Really pleased again. Thank you so much, Dr. Gloria Desantis, for joining us today and sharing the breadth and depth of your personal, practical, professional, and academia experience with some of the best practices around hosting virtual AGM. So again, thanks so much, Gloria, and the floor is all yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Shari. And the tough part about this, as the third person, I'm thinking, wow, right on, Christy and Paige, you've covered a huge amount of the terrain that needs to be talked about. So I'm really delighted to be here. So thank you for the invitation. I'm going to try really hard not to duplicate what Christy and Paige have walked us through. So if you hear me kind of stop for a second and think about something and decide not to say it, it's because they've already said it. So for sure, I'm going to be reflecting on my experience as president of this national association that actually studies nonprofits and charities and their work in our society. This organization is the Canadian Association for Nonprofit and Social Economy Research. And even though that sounds really big and important and national in scale, we're actually very small and have all the challenges that small nonprofits have. For example, we have no paid staff. We have to rely on members of our board to organize and host our AGM every year. Every year, the executive committee and our communications and outreach chairperson becomes our planning team, if you will, for our AGM, and that was no different this year. The third or fourth major kind of piece to note here is that we were very fortunate to have tech support from a company called AV Canada. And the only reason we have that tech support was because we had a relationship with another national organization that we are connected with, given our national annual conference every year. So therein lies another little kind of important point. Do connect with those you have relationships with to see you through this. So we are a registered charity and we are a registered federal nonprofit. We are not provincially registered. So we are governed by the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. So we had to pay attention to the requirements of that act. So that's just a quick introduction. And today I'm just going to highlight three main areas. Number one is the skills and mindsets for virtual AGMs, kind of because this struck home for me around why am I feeling like this? Why am I feeling like I'm sitting on the edge? And so I wanted to walk you through some of the things that I struggled with in my own self-talk, if you will. Second major piece is this thing called accessibility. You can't serve your membership if you don't know who they are. And that was something that really struck me earlier on in the process, and perhaps it has to do with my sense of my uneasy relationship with technology. I'm not sure, I'm still thinking through that one. And the third major piece is just a heads up around what you usually do with your AGM. It's definitely not business as usual when you have to go virtual. So first off, what skills and mindsets? So number one here for me was it's gonna take time, so just hunker down and get at it. So organizing and preparing for our AGM this year required easily 5 times the amount of time than usual, because of all the extra work required in getting to know everything from new technology to software, etc. Our AGM this year took actually an hour and a half. Usually it takes us 45 minutes, but we had heard somewhere along in the grapevine that make sure you plan for extra time, because even something as simple as voting, which in our case is usually a show of hands, usually in a classroom setting on a university campus, where you quickly tally up hands in favor or abstaining or opposed to a vote. In this particular case, you have to set aside a bit of time for voting to take place. So that was key kind of point there about being mindful of time and adding extra time to your planning work. The second major piece here is a virtual AGM required us to think about things in layers, a little bit like an onion, and having to drill deep into it. So for me, the first layer I often think about, and with regard to face-to-face AGMs, is, okay, you have to imagine and know the room, the space that you're going to be meeting in. How are people actually going to get to that room? Is there an elevator, or are there just stairs, which is hugely problematic? So this is all familiar territory to us as we think about accessibility. But that now drills us or moves us into a second layer here, which is the virtual meeting space. Okay, so now we're not going to do this physically. So how do we ensure everyone can get to the right room and can actually participate? So we know how to send out maps about buildings and streets, but how do we do this with technology? And for sure, Christy and Paige have already alluded to how you do this in terms of sending out instructions in advance. So these become really important. They are maps and instructions, and giving yourself, well, we gave ourselves a month in advance to let members know that this is the technology we're using. And my name was right on that list for if you have questions or concerns, please call Gloria. And in fact, that we had indicated we needed to have everything in place a few days before our AGM, which this year was June 4th, and we did not move our meeting for a variety of reasons, which we'll come back to, even though we had permission to do so by the federal government. The third layer of the onion for me, and I think many on our planning team, was learning to be comfortable with the technology. And again, this has already been noted. So despite our feelings of fear and the sense that we're not technologically literate enough, there were 2 key things we had to do. Practice was really critical. So some of you have already noted that. So I practiced with colleagues, with friends, and even with my adult children. We got on Zoom one night and we started working with it early, well, actually probably early April, as we were kind of trying to decide what to do. And it was there suddenly that I realized that Zoom Bob thing was a problem, because my one son said, oh, I have to show you this funny video. And he took over my screen and he played this funny video. And I went, okay, so there needs to be capacity for somebody to control some of these devices, so this kind of thing can be managed in a better way. So practicing is really essential. And the second major piece here, of course, has already been mentioned. Rehearsing is mandatory. We never actually rehearsed face-to-face AGMs, but we sure rehearsed both the technology use, and we had almost line-by-line script that the group of 5 of us had in case I, as president, suddenly ended up technically kicked out of the meeting, that someone else could carry on. So we had a script ready to roll. The fourth layer of the onion was not knowing who was actually going to show up, how many people were going to be there. For sure, we did, like both Paige and Christy indicated, is that only members were given the information to log on, but still not knowing how many people may join us had an impact on who was going to have videos on or off, and the kind of the bandwidth problem that goes along with that. Turns out we had, I believe, 22 members as part of our AGM, so we actually left videos on because AGMs for us are kind of a social time anyway, so it was good to see people. And then, of course, the fifth and final layer of the onion for us was what was happening during the meeting. And one of the difficult things we experienced, or we had a sense of, especially after the rehearsal, was we can't rely on each other on the planning team for non-verbal cues that we usually rely on during face-to-face meetings. So some of us actually had our other communication devices on. So I had my cell phone on beside me, ready for text messages from anybody else on the planning team. And sorting out those roles on the planning team were very similar to what Paige and Christy talked about. So that was the onion for me, and how I thought a little bit about how I had to kind of do things differently. The third major piece I just note for you is having to pay attention to our feelings and our sense of things and our instincts and our imagination. For example, we started off from a place of panic and fear, but we worked through the self-talk about we can pull this off. We have 8 weeks to do this. And we have a history of success in other areas of our organization, much like many of you do. So you have to reflect on the success in order to take a deep breath and go forward. Some of us also felt very fearful because we feel tech illiterate, but working with this organization, AV Canada, which we were really fortunate enough to be partnered with as a result of this larger national nonprofit, now is not the time for us to pretend you know it all. We ask for a lot of help all along the way. And for sure, planning anything is about predicting the future and trying to account for and deal with many variables as possible. This is no different with your virtual AGM. So having a script for everyone, having preconceived notions, all of that kind of stuff becomes critical. And the fourth major point here about mindset and skills, and again, this is something you likely already do as well, is this notion of trust. And trusting your colleagues around you, whether they are volunteer board members. For someone like me, who we have no paid staff, so we had to rely on each other. Being really clear about who has the capacity to do what is pretty critical. We can't have somebody faking they know some technology and they don't. So those are the mindsets and things that I wanted to just highlight really quickly. The accessibility piece is really, I don't know why it became uppermost in my mind. Maybe it was because I was insecure around technology, but all I could think about was the members across the country and what kind of technology was actually going to be workable. So accessibility for me meant going through our membership list to get a sense of who our members are. So I actually went through our list, and it's about 120 members right now from across Canada. I made notes about different accessibility types. For example, organizations, were they small, medium, large, university-based or not? Number two, were they rural or urban? Because some people would have poor internet access in rural Canada. Number three, we are a bilingual nonprofit. Thus, I had to pay attention to French-English issues. And the last one was checking whether any of my members may need sign language interpretation. So I did all of that as I prepared to send out the notice, and it's in that place where I actually asked people, much like the other speakers mentioned, who needs help and what kind of help. So it's important to kind of think about those various points of accessibility, but be very careful about making assumptions about people, and therefore, again, the point about asking outright is critical. For example, one of my board members is a university professor, but when COVID unfolded, she went to work from home with her 3-year-old with her all day long. Chaos set in for her, and she just, we lost track of her for the rest of the duration, and she didn't make it to the AGM. I caught up with her the other day, but as she explained, it was just, her world was absolute chaos. And so even questions about, you know, giving advance notice and all of that kind of stuff, even our own board members struggled over this period of time. The other main piece here about accessibility is, what do our bylaws stipulate about where, when and how we're supposed to meet. So every year, we're supposed to meet according to our bylaws. Our annual general meeting has to happen when we hold our annual conference every year. So we thought, okay, that's okay. We made the decision, let's try to continue to do that. Our annual conference happens June every year and happens over 3 days. The place of the meeting, section 5.3 of our bylaws very clearly indicated that as well. What was new to us, of course, and this was the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act that requires an addition to our bylaws, which we were already aware of back in January, February, when we did our bylaws review, is we inserted a new section that needed to be approved by the membership. And that was section 5.9, participation by electronic means at members' meetings. So it was that particular bylaw which we moved right up to the very beginning of our AGM and had to have a specific motion and vote on adding this to our bylaws before we could even start our meeting. So as you can imagine, if that bylaw motion didn't pass, our AGM would not have happened that day. So I also did a lot of holding of my breath as things unfolded over the course of this time. So what's really critical to note in this part of the Not-for-Profit Corporations Act is that it's up to the association to make available for the purposes of the AGM this technology. So it's there that for me, the question about accessibility is directly connected to our bylaws and what we are morally and legally obligated to do. Of course, some of us who do social justice work, I was very aware of various other acts like the Accessibility for Ontarians Disability Act and various other acts that we have that govern how we ensure that we have better access for people with disabilities to what we're working on. So for sure, asking people outright what they need it was really critical in the work we did leading up to the AGM. So finally, the last section I just wanted to note, and it has to do with our conference, is that, you know, be careful what you marry with your AGM because it's not business as usual. I know with my work in the nonprofit sector before I went to academia, we used to try to have neat community gatherings coupled along with our event, our AGM, just to try to get people to show up for the AGM. What I found this year was that this 3-day conference with our AGM right in the middle of it was outright exhausting for people. We now see literature emerging that sitting in front of a screen, you know, even if you're reading and doing emails and doing Zooms and meetings and things like that, it takes its toll on us in a way that face-to-face things never have. So it's important to note that even though our bylaws spoke about us doing our AGM at the same time as our meeting, as our conference, it posed its significant kind of share of problems, including some of us missing a lunch break that you realize, oh, I didn't build in time for that when you're doing this simultaneously. So in closing, for sure, we need to strive to serve our members well, especially regarding our legal requirements, but a moral duty as well. And for sure, as others have alluded to, we're never perfect. I held my breath a lot of the time, sometimes closed my eyes because I couldn't look. I sometimes felt like a child who doesn't want to see a scary scene in a movie, but in the end it worked. And we absolutely asked for people's patience and kindness, and in the end, they were granted. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, Gloria. I really think the approach of the skills and the mindset is really going to resonate with folks. I love the approach of almost decriminalizing it. Understand you need to do it virtually. It's going to take time, so let's jump into it and figure out what those next steps are going to look like. And again, as you said, for this particular organization and for all of the participants on the webinar today, think about where those areas of success are. So what is going to override that idea of panic? We're rock stars. Here's what we deliver and deliver really well. We know we can do this. I think that's really important messaging. One of my co-presenters for an earlier toolkit series with the CRU at the time unit and a webinar that we did, one of the doctors on the call said, you can't move into an area of growth if you don't move from your comfort zone to an uncomfort zone. and how can we really use this COVID experience to move from that comfort zone into the uncomfort zone and just realize new and different types of successes. And I think we've really heard that certainly through your presentation and the presentation of our other two presenters today. Equally, Gloria, on your points around accessibility, from my own experience, and I will tell you for one of the organizations I support, the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, we recently had our AGM in June of this year. And not only are we, pan-Canadian organization, we have persons with multiple different types of disabilities and accessibility requirements. So we were looking at American Sign Language translators, French Sign Language translators, captioners, all of the appropriate supports for all of our members. And again, much different than gathering in Winnipeg once a year and relying on our traditional way of engaging. We'd still have, translators and so on, but the added layer of that onion, and I love that analogy of thinking of accessibility in a virtual format in all platforms and for all accessibility requirements. So again, you've really shone the light on some important topics and important considerations for organizations as they navigate these, uncharted waters, new territory for hosting a virtual AGM. So thank you again very much, Gloria. There were a few questions that came up over the course of the presentations. Some of them, and I'm sure for both our presenters and for the participants on this webinar, some of these have come through in the all group chat, but I will just flag them and we can just sort of examine them one by one, and with the added information that other participants have provided as well. Christy, I'll go to you first. One of the questions that came up, and it was a couple of times here, in most cases, organizations advertise their AGM for about 2 weeks. For yourself, Christy, and certainly to Paige and Gloria as well, did you advertise longer because of the impacts of COVID? Is there more lead time required to deal with those accessibility pieces, whether it's scheduling the Zoom or getting physical materials out? Just any comments on lead time and advertising time?
For sure. I believe we advertised for 3 weeks, so a little bit longer than typical. And again, with the caveat, knowing that the meeting was going to be a smaller group of people local to Regina. So, different requirements that way. And so we did build in the lead time, as I had mentioned, to physically deliver the materials to folks in advance of the meeting.
Yeah, so a little bit of extra lead time. And just for the folks on the call, if you haven't been paying attention to your chat, just a note, thank you so much, Wendy Fitch from Museums Association of Saskatchewan. I understand you're on the webinar today. Thanks so much, Wendy, for your comments in the chat where you noted that Mass did do a longer advertisement period to ensure that members were aware and able to register. And as you very importantly noted, Wendy, you didn't allow non-voting members to participate to ensure that your votes were legal. So Mass used a strategy that, again, took a little bit of a additional time for that advertisement and preparation process. Paige, go ahead.
We were the same. We did 3 weeks out. I'm pretty sure that's what our bylaws say we have to at least do. We did do a bonus advertisement sort of in April when we had canceled our first one. Just putting that announcement in print, just saying like we're moving digitally, date to be determined. If you want to find out more, just sign up for our newsletter and we'll let you know when we're doing it. But we did start advertising the final online one 3 weeks out as well.
Yeah, so a little bit of extra lead time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Gloria, in your comments, you talked about the duration as well relative to, that 8 weeks. So you knew you had eight weeks to plan and execute a successful event. So, again, I think the overall messaging is certainly my own experience, being mindful that, as you said, Gloria, things do take a bit longer. You even alluded to 5 times longer, and that the AGM that normally would happen in 45 minutes would now take an hour and a half. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, agree, 100%.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Paige, while I have you here, I'm just going to go through, there were a couple of questions. One that has come up is for individuals, and again, for the entire panelist, for individuals on the Zoom AGM, Zoom being the platform, if they only phoned in, how did you manage your non-video participants?
Yeah, honestly, we didn't give too much thought about them. You know, we knew they phoned in, they could hear everything. They would have received, if they were a voting member that called in, they would have received their voting stuff, so they could have still done it virtually. If they were phoning in and not at their offices or at their desks, our voting tool, well, you could do the text in. It was also mobile friendly for mobile browsers to vote, so they could still vote and participate over a phone. And actually, until I saw that question come up, I didn't really think about how would I mute them if they just started talking over us. So not something we thought about.
So maybe another consideration.
Yeah.
I don't know, Gloria or Christy, I know Christy, it was a smaller compliment for reach. Any other thoughts or comments around those individuals that are just calling in?
Well, that's, for us, that's why we used the different way to vote. So to have folks speak up if they abstain or don't agree with the motion. So we tried to do it that way to help those folks participate.
Great.
Just to add to that, we were prepared for call-ins. We basically were using the yes, no feature for the voting. When you click on participants, up pop the yes, no part for voting, and then abstentions were noted verbally. For people who called in, we didn't end up having anybody call in, but we were prepared to actually ask them to indicate their vote. All of this other material is public as well. Our votes are all public, so we don't have secret or other balloting required. So we tried to mimic as much as possible what happened in the face-to-face.
Yeah, so replicating as close as possible to the face-to-face.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Gloria. And actually a really good dovetail into one of the other questions that was asked, how do you access the voting tool? And again, within the chat, there was some response that talked about within the more enhanced version of Zoom, there is the polling tool that can be utilized. Paige, you talked about some softwares, and Swift, I think, is what you ended up landing on. So you could have the live or the real-time voting. One of the other tools that I've used is called Simply Voting, and this is designed, Paige, as you noted, for those that want to have a ballot-style election ahead of. So for one of my clients, we did all of our motions, so everything, acceptance of the executive's report, the financial statements, appointment of the auditor, as well as voting for the 2 positions on the board of director. This was a pan-Canadian client. So we did it ballot style by election with an opening and closing date. Again, it provided excellent analytics to ensure that we had demonstration of enough registered members voting to ensure quorum and to ensure that those votes were legal and binding. So there are a number of different tools out there. I know the question that came through the chat was more specific around Zoom, which again, I know there was additional feedback from other participants that Zoom does have the polling feature. Again, for another client, we actually did use the polling feature to conduct our votes. However, because of accessibility issues, we also ran a SurveyMonkey in tandem at the same time for those that weren't on the Zoom call. So they with their attendants could respond to the SurveyMonkey questions. And again, we had a team in behind that was consolidating and reporting the SurveyMonkey results into the scrutineers along with the polling results into the scrutineers. So we had a very transparent, fair, thorough democratic process, and that we could demonstrate that to all of our members. So again, you know, there's no one right way, I think, is what we're hearing. And certainly, you know, Paige, I agree with you in doing a bit of that research. and finding the tool that's going to work for you. I don't know if any of the panelists would like to add any other comments around voting tools or other considerations that we maybe haven't talked about. Okay, covers it. Great, thank you. There was another question that came through, and this is for all of the panelists. How can you not allow everyone to register for an annual meeting? AGMs are open to the public, are they not? Whoever would like to jump in, and again, this will depend on your jurisdiction as to how the responses come through.
So we did have people who weren't voting participate in the AGM. We asked them to pre-register so that we could share the link, and as I had said, just for security reasons, and then, you know, made sure that they knew that they couldn't vote. Again, they were folks from other nonprofits within the city that are partner organizations, so they were very well aware of the processes.
Any other comments from our, go ahead, Paige. I was just gonna say, I agree. We included our public. So we did the same as Christy mentioned, you know, having 2 different voting links so we could separate our members from our donors from our non-donors for voting purposes. Gloria?
Yeah, and this was an area of major concern for us because, well, our AGMs are usually always open. Our legal people were basically, and we've seen precedents through the, what's it called, the Federation of the Humanities and Social Sciences, as a national organization that struggled with the same thing. The voting thing becomes really complicated because if there's a tight vote and you can't actually prove who voted for certain things. So we went back and forth on our board around whether or not we would have observers or the public, if you will, engaged in our AGM. In the end, given some of the precedents set by other organizations specifically around AGMs and the fact that we weren't overly comfortable with some of the voting technology, that we opted for our AGM was open to our members. So good chance this will be revisited by the board though.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gloria. And I would tend to concur. I know in the chat we saw, again, Wendy Fitch had noted that it was, their AGM was not open to non-members. I do believe as well, many organizations are going to be revisiting this. For one of my clients, what we did was actually moved all of our non-voting members into a breakout room. And again, this is a bit of a dovetail into a question that came through the chat. Did anyone use the breakout rooms? And we've certainly used them, you know, for training purposes when you're doing a webinar and you want to have group discussions. Another individual noted using breakout rooms in Zoom for under 100 participants and for ice breaking or speed dating type get to know you. For the purposes of the AGM, as I said, with one of my clients, we actually physically moved all of our non-voting members into a breakout room and we held them there until our voting was complete. So again, it's really about being sort of creative and innovative, thinking about different strategies. But again, Gloria, I absolutely agree with you that I think many organizations are going to be revisiting this as we've all experienced it, and what are some of those lessons learned, and particularly as I believe you alluded to, Paige, that United Way Calgary and area may look at a virtual AGM next year again, and I think many organizations will be. So lots of good subject matter to revisit, I would suggest, as we go forward. Just want to make sure I'm not missing any other questions. We talked about AGM being open to the public, the Zoom, where folks are just dialing in. I believe that brings us to the end of all of the formal questions. Yeah, and the only other one then, and this, Gloria, we've talked about this already, was how much extra time would organizations anticipate? And as you had said in your example, 5 times on the planning and about double the time in the actual execution. And certainly from my perspective, that would be consistent as well. We are sitting at 10 minutes to the half hour, which would represent the end of the webinar. We just want to open the floor up for any final comments from each of our panelists before we wrap up the session. So go ahead, Christy, if you don't mind, any final comments to round up the day?
I just want to thank everybody, and Shari and Gloria and Paige. I learned a ton of information, so thank you very much. This was, you know, very much out of my comfort zone at the beginning to do this, and so I'm very grateful. So thank you. And to Brendan and to Lynn as well. So thank you.
Nice. Thanks very much, Christy. And as you'll see in the chat, for those participants today, to you and to all of the panelists, this information has been incredibly helpful to so many. So I think it's learning both sides of the panelist and the participant side. Paige, any final thoughts or comments to round out the day?
Yeah, I echo Christy again. Thank you, everyone. This was great conversations. My only final thought is just test it, go out, have fun, try something new. You know, we're all learning this on the fly. We're gonna screw it up, we're gonna bounce back. The nice thing about this time is everybody's so patient with any little glitches. So just fly with it and have some fun. And to Gloria's remark at the end about chaos for speakers, it's one thing we've done with all of our speaker briefings is, you know, be prepared, like pre-plan how you're going to react if your kids come running in the room or your cat crosses the screen, because it's going to happen. But just sort of think ahead of how you're going to react in that moment, because you don't want to be that story on YouTube of like the guy pushing a child out of the way, or you know, you don't want to become a meme. So think ahead of how you can react in those situations. And that just comes from good planning and like practice with everything else. But thank you everyone for having me. Happy to answer any other questions anytime too. So
great, thanks so much, Paige. I think those are really good words of advice. The proactive versus reactive, and always expect the unexpected. So you know, all of that advance, all that investment in the time and planning and practice and rehearsal, and you know, those other examples that we've heard today, I think really important to reinforce those. Thanks again, Paige. Finally, just turn it over to Gloria for any final thoughts or comments to round out today's session.
Thanks very much. I don't think I want to say anything else. I see a question or something pop up here, so maybe I'll just set the time
Sure.
over to, I think it's Abby Wolf there. So why don't we just pop over there?
Yeah, that sounds just great. So the question that was asked, could any of the panelists share considerations around whether or not to limit participants' ability to chat with the board and CEO during the AGM? Is it best practice to prevent participants' members from submitting private questions to the board and CEO, so that questions must be verbalized openly the way they would at an in-person presentation, and therefore captured in the minutes appropriately? In an online platform, these different avenues for submitting questions and correspondence between participants is a bit more open than it would be in person. So any thoughts or comments on that? Maybe on the, you know, sort of the policy or the governance side, Gloria, you may have some comments.
Yeah, we try really hard to be an open book. Transparency, I think, is really critical. In our planning work leading up to AGMs, we've gone through bylaws. We've gone through every nook and cranny of the material that we need to present. And so I believe, as president of my organization, that when you get to an AGM, this is public. It's a public gathering. And I mean, unless a member specifically asks for something quiet on the side in the chat, we had talked about the fact that it is a public meeting and that things are open. I mean, I think it should be kind of talked about publicly, whatever the issue may be. Again, we don't have staff in our organization, but to me, an AGM is a public place where we should be having these public conversations.
Yeah, the approach around sort of that transparency and yeah, openness and accountability. Any other thoughts from Christy or Paige on this one? It's a big topic, I know.
I'll go. So we did open our chat. We did let people chat with whomever in the event. We did ask if they had any specific questions. However, in the Zoom webinar feature, there's the Q&A portal. So we did ask that any questions, not just comments, come through that Q&A, just so that all of our panelists, you know, are anybody who was speaking, we had a wide range of digital capabilities speaking as well, and felt that it was best to sort of filter all of those in through that Q&A portal, just so they had one spot to look for it and not, you know, going through the Q&A and then through the chat, because yeah, the chat can get out of hand and it's busy. So we didn't really want our board members having to worry about finding those. And then that's where our one staff member that was monitoring the chat and the Q&A as well, she would help filter any of those over to our board members also in that digital space. So yeah, we didn't limit anybody, but we tried to filter where they saw it, so to make it easier on our end.
Yeah, great advice. Thanks, Paige. Christy, any other comments in that realm?
No, you know what, honestly, for us, it wasn't something that we had considered. Again, the smallness of the group didn't really put that front of mind for us, but it's something I will definitely think of for future ones.
Yeah, no, and I certainly, from my experience, would concur with Paige, the use of the Q&A feature. So again, folks, just that slightly enhanced version of Zoom that provides for the increased functionality for polling and for the Q&A management. Not only is it really beneficial for your panelists, but it also allows you to retire the questions once they've been answered, which can be done verbally by the panelists or through text in a response back to the participant. So again, really effective way of managing the Q&A, and I would absolutely concur, Paige. It's been effective for a couple of the AGMs that I've hosted. So with that, folks, we are coming to the end of our session. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I think, oh yes, so we've answered all of the questions that are in or have come in through the chat. Again, I want to extend most sincere thanks to all three of you. It has been an incredibly full hour and a half with many learnings, many best practices, excellent experiences, and you know, just to echo all of the thanks that are coming in on the chat from the participants. Real pleasure to have the three of you today. Again, thanks so much to Lynn, Brandon over at the Community Engagement and Resource Center. Exciting new name and expanded name to reflect their new expanded mandate and community reach. And for all of the participants on the line, thank you for joining. I hope you've had some solid takeaways. The chat really demonstrates that folks are finding all of this information incredibly valuable and enormously useful at this point in their annual calendar. So again, thanks so much, folks. It's been a real pleasure to moderate for you today. And again, we will have this session, it's recorded. We will have it posted up on the center's website as soon as possible. I know that there's lots of comments coming in that others would definitely benefit from the information that was shared here today by our three panelists. So again, thanks so much, folks. Thanks very much, Lynn and Brendan, and I will move to end the recording and close out today's webinar on how to host a virtual AGM. Thanks, folks.